So, hello, we're live again. Sleep meditation creation sessions. If you find this interesting or helpful, feel free to subscribe. Feel free to give it a thumbs up if you like it. And obviously, if you listen to this after it's been live, feel free to comment below. Just have some water. And it'll work like normal. So there'll be about 20 minutes of chatting, getting any yawning out the way, things like that. And then we will get some ideas that I will create some kind of sleep meditation with. And yeah, so same structure as usual. And then the sleep meditation will hopefully start about 10:30. I saw a comment a minute ago about about fairies. Too many fairies in the stories. Obviously, I can only work with what gets suggested. But I also saw golden keys. I don't recall when or if I've had golden keys in any of my stories. If anyone can remember, I'm just looking back. I don't remember golden keys being in my stories. I might have had one in one somewhere, but it's definitely not a common thing. But fairies have been. There are certain things that I think people seem to suggest. Fairies, fireflies, and cats seem to be incredibly common suggestions. Just try and take the lid off my pen so I can draw a line under my heading. There. That'll be my page for ideas. Yeah, I think it was once before. I don't know if it was mentioned as a golden key or not, but I know it's very rare that something like golden keys would crop up. I'm trying to think what context that was that I used a golden key. I think I had a golden key in the twin one or something, where I decided to have a key to open the safe or open the chest or something. I can't remember. But anyway, yeah, there are some common ideas that seem to come up. The pen writes like any other pen, so it writes kind of normal. Oh, I don't remember more than one golden key. Golden key hasn't been suggested, so if I've done golden key, that's been something I've ended up doing. It hasn't been suggested as an idea for, well, I've got all the ideas in front of me. Cucumber gets suggested a lot, oddly. Yeah, no golden keys mentioned last time. A cucumber mentioned again. Crystals crop up a lot for some reason. I'm just reading back to see crystals again. No golden key in 30 or gold or anything in 34. Just having a look back. No golden key in 33. 33 had very few suggestions. I think that was a quiet night. No gold or golden keys or anything in 32. Gold was mentioned in 31. Tree, painting, essential oils, crystal. Trying to work out which one this is. Swimming, snorkeling, mountain top. Breeze, wind chimes. Ah, that must be the... Maybe that was the one with the dragon in. No, that was the spa day. I think I've actually written that down. So the spa day had a golden had gold in, so I might have done a golden key. Golden key was suggested in number 30, which had ocean, boat, giraffe, basset hound, camel, magic twins. So yeah, the twin one had a golden key in, and gold was mentioned in the one after that. So I might have created a golden key in that one. I don't know. But yeah, golden key is definitely not a common suggestion. But fairies definitely are. I think we go through stages. Fairy was not suggested for a bunch of weeks. I'm just looking through still. That's why I'm looking down. Just looking back over a few. Yeah, there's nothing before that, at least for quite a while. But anyway, yeah, fairy wasn't mentioned for ages and ages, and then suddenly started getting mentioned a lot again. Just like cats, they went through stages of not being mentioned for a while, and then being mentioned loads and loads and loads for weeks. For a number of these in a row, like 4 or 5 in a row. And then obviously people complained, saying, "All your stories are about cats. Drop the cats." And then they started getting mentioned less. Yeah, fireflies. I think nearly every single story someone suggests fireflies. Pickles the cat was in the World War II one, the one with Ellen. But yeah, fireflies have suddenly, for whatever reason, over the last month or something, cropped up a lot, as have fairies. Obviously, the last story that I recorded, I think it was the last story I recorded, I merged the two together. So it was, they look like fireflies, but then one of them comes down and they're a fairy. And then you go up to the kind of Ewok style house. Just looking at the comments. So just get it back down because I scrolled up to see what was mentioned. Um, I've no idea. It's the same kind of people who join the live chats. This is something I raise often in the people comment obviously on my various sleep meditations, saying, "Oh, I'd love it if you would do one about this, and I'd love it if you do one about that." And obviously, with over 200 sleep meditations, everything someone says, pretty much, well, everything someone says so far outside of these live streams, I have done meditations with them in. And so I always say, "Oh, I've done a meditation with that. It's this one," or "I've done a meditation with that. It's this one." Or you can go to this playlist and you'll find a bunch of meditations that have that, like mountains or whatever. People will say, "Oh, could you do one with mountains? Could you do one with camping? Could you do one um, out in a forest? Could you do one under the sea? Could you do one in space?" And all of these things I've done. And so I end up saying, "Yep, already been there, already done it." And I always point out to people that if they want to have a story tailored around what they like, then join the live stream and suggest it. But as many of you, especially those of you who've been here longer, know, when people don't like my live streams. So those of you who join me here, obviously you join me, some of you regularly, and so you obviously manage to tolerate seeing my face for a couple of hours in what's my evening. Um, but a lot of people, obviously, as you know, I asked my audience. I've got 66,000 subscribers, and I'm lucky to get maybe 30 people at the maximum tuning in here, watching me do the sleep creation session and joining in and actually suggesting ideas. There's never 30 people suggesting ideas. There's normally maybe 5 or 6 of you who'll suggest all the ideas. Um, and it's the same people. I know some of you obviously know this and have tried to hold back your suggestions on purpose to give others a chance to suggest things. And those are the times when we've ended up with no suggestions, and then you've ended up having to dive in and give suggestions. But that's why we end up, I think, with a bunch of the same kind of suggestions, because um, others, even some people who are tuned in, aren't jumping on the live chat and suggesting ideas. And so we end up with the same people who obviously, as time goes on, end up repeating suggestions they've already done before, because that's the problem I have, which is why, I've spoken about this before, about how stressful it is to do these as a regular thing, not the live bit. I mean, making sleep meditations regularly, because I have to come up with a new story every single time I do it. And so to keep coming up with new stories is very difficult when I'm using my brain that obviously goes around the same ideas. So I have to then keep thinking, how can I come up with ideas I can't think of, so that every story is then unique and original, etc. And so obviously that's where doing this helps, because then you guys are suggesting, you're the ones who watch the videos, and you're the ones who then are suggesting the ideas. And so the difficulty is having enough people suggesting the ideas, enough variety of people suggesting the ideas, so that every week has quite different stories. So that things that have gone through waves of cropping up lots, because that's what the suggestions are, and I can only work with what I've been suggested. Um, so if the suggestions are constantly fairies, fireflies, um, trees, mushrooms, different food was one thing that went through a phase where it seemed to be food constantly suggested, and so I'd have to try and create the meditations with food. Um, but it means that obviously I'm ending up creating stuff that the stories are all very, very different, but there's the same things. So you'll end up talking to a fairy, or you'll end up talking to whatever it happens to be. Um, so that's been the kind of the issue, that I don't think it's that people like fairy stories and so fairies get suggested a lot. I think it's that the same people are in the live chat, and those same people like fairies perhaps, and so suggest them. Just as an example. Whereas if out of my 66,000 subscribers, more than just 20 of you um, joined in the live chat, which 20 out of 66,000 is not a particularly good success rate of engagement. That's obviously where the problem lies. And then I get all these comments, obviously, on my videos saying, can you do a story with this? Can you do a story with that? Can you do a story with this? But those people don't join in the story creation sessions. They just sort of want it to happen somehow. And when I've suggested joining in, it's like, well, no, I'm not doing that. That's boring. And I've had, obviously, as you've known from the community comments where I've asked about it, that people have obviously unsubscribed, and those who haven't unsubscribed have considered unsubscribing because of how boring I am to, this is their words, not mine, how boring I am to listen to during the sleep meditation creation sessions. And so they can't do it, and they'd rather unsubscribe and not have any of my meditations than be aware that I'm doing live videos. And obviously that was why I went to Facebook and did the live videos on Facebook for a while, but we know how that turned out. Um, Facebook was easier to use for me, but I don't think it worked out quite so well for the viewers joining in the Facebook. And so we came back here to YouTube again, and every video I post, live video like this, obviously I lose a lot of subscribers. But at the same time, I create the stories that the subscribers who leave want me to have on my channel. But yeah, so it'd be nice if more than currently 25 people joined in these and contributed. If a chunk of the 66,000 jumped in here. But yeah, so let me have a look at the comments. Yeah, they want the stories that they want, but they don't want necessarily to have to contribute to it, and they don't want me to do the live streams to get it. Because obviously, I had that when I said that on the community tab, where I said, "But you're to people, but you're saying you don't want me to do the live streams. You want me to stop doing that." I think it was like 96% or something of people voting on it said, "Do not do the live streams," and then commented saying, "We don't like it. Don't do it." Um, and I said, but it's the live streams that are getting you the long stories that you say you want. You don't want really short stories. And the live streams are what are getting you these hour-long stories that you say you want. And so they want it, and then obviously they said, "Oh, you're just blackmailing us, saying you won't do these long stories unless we join your live stream." And I was trying to say, no, the live stream is why the long stories exist. If it isn't for these live streams, you don't get the long stories. Yeah, every story does pretty much get thousands of views. From my subscribers, only 40% of the views come from my subscribers. Uh, and out of that 40%, that's not 40% of my audience has viewed it. So in a month, because normally my videos get good views for the first week and then it peters off, and most of the videos hit about 7 to 10,000 views, and then they pretty much go silent, and people have moved on to a new story. They don't re-listen to old ones. So not everyone does that, obviously, but largely people move on to whatever my latest video is. And so what ends up happening is that my videos get probably 7 to 10,000 views before they go calm and kind of start getting just 2 or 3 views a day per video. The odd one will, like the cabin in the woods one, did really well out the blue. But out of those, say for easy maths, say 10,000 views on one of my videos, 6,000 of those views are by people who don't subscribe to my channel. 4,000 of them are by people who do subscribe to my channel, and the average number of times someone views it per video is over 2 times. So out of those 4,000, as an average, there's 2,000 unique people, subscribers, who have viewed my videos. So out of 66,000 people, 2,000 of those 66,000 actually view my videos on average per sort of new video that goes live. So I don't know what the other 64,000 people do, but yeah, so that's kind of how it works. Is that question to me? What 2 stories are your favorite that you listen to every night? Yeah, some people obviously do like the live streams and have joined me for lots of live streams, including live streams about very different topics than these sleep meditations. Yeah, I've done a lot of ones about healing yourself recently, but that's entirely because it's cropped up a lot in the live chat about people wanting stuff around pain management, um, support around helping to heal physically with things, or managing the immune system and different things like that. So it's just happened that that's been requested as an extra thing. So I end up mentioning those um, topics as well. Um, I don't know. I listen sometimes to my own stories. Possibly the mermaid one's okay. My Prince Adventures of a Prince story is probably the main one of mine that I listen to. Um, but I commonly listen to meditainment tracks. So now I've got more of my own with backing music and sound effects. I listen to those a bit more. But generally, I listen to meditainment tracks because they've got backing music and sound effects, and that helps me to be more absorbed in it because I'm not very good at visualizing or anything. So hearing water while hearing someone rowing in water, for example, makes me better able to be absorbed in the sort of idea of rowing in water. Hearing someone walking through woodland makes me more able to be absorbed in the idea of walking through woodland. Just having words telling me doesn't really sort of absorb me enough. I just sort of process it in a very intellectual kind of way, and it just doesn't work. Um, and so I can make it to the end of my stories when I'm doing that. Um, Whereas the meditainment ones are perhaps 15 minutes long, and I won't think I'm going to be asleep by the end of it, and I'll be asleep by the end of it. There's tons and tons on my channel that are like the beach centralization. All that is essentially a watered down, um, shorter version of some of the things that are over here on this channel, where I do multi-sensory kind of stuff, and obviously where there's sound effects and things, I've got a playlist of ones that have all that, like the sensualization one. I've got no plans on making more sensualization ones. I made that one as part of the series that David was doing. I don't do any of that now, really. I don't do. I literally am trying to distance myself from anything other than just cracking on with sleep stories because that's what people generally want. Um, so I don't really do any of the other things. So let's have a look. Let's start getting some ideas. I've got my pen out again. Yeah, the Distant Storm one's quite an old one. Um, I think. Yeah, the Mind Changers channel. I won't post much of that kind of thing over there because that's not what the channel's about. But I do post it's predominantly educational. Um, Forest. I didn't know I was pixelated. Owls seem to be in trouble when I use them in stories. Right, that'll be enough ideas, and let's see if we can start kind of on time. We normally start very late. Because I end up reading things. Right, let's move these out of the way, the arms of the chair. Try and get any yawning out of the way. Write one more thing down. Try to remember if I did that last week. Don't think so. Right, 31 minutes in. Yes, glad you can make it here tonight as well. So, to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to relax, I'm just going to tell this sleep meditation in the background. And I don't know whether you'll drift deeper to the sound of my voice or to the spaces between my words as you continue to listen along. And as you drift comfortably asleep, you can have a sense of a woman going out on a long walk, and she's got a backpack on, and she's carrying a telescope over her shoulder. And as the sun is setting, she's going to trek through a forest, out into a meadow, finding a clearing where she can set up that telescope and get a once in a lifetime view of a comet. And so she walks up to the edge of the forest, her feet crunching on the grass, that sun beginning to set low over the forest, the sky in shades of reds and orange, and a deep dark blue, the opposite side to the sun. And as that sun continues to set behind the forest, so the light just manages to occasionally twinkle and send almost laser beam-like shards of light through the trees to the forest floor. And she pushes into that forest, pushes through the branches, and notices how the sounds change as she walks into that forest. Notices the air become stiller, change in temperature on her cheeks, and sounds of birds in the forest, and the rustling leaves. But a certain stillness that wasn't outside the forest. And each step makes more of a thud as she carefully pushes through the trees, weaves between those trees, leaning her hands on the bark of the trees as she moves forward. Noticing how quickly it starts to get dark in the forest. And so she attaches a torch to her jacket, turns the light on, and carries on pushing forward with that torch illuminating the way, the light bouncing off the trees, the way the light shows the lack of reflectiveness of the ground, and illuminates the particles in the air. Some of them being more reflective than others, almost creating that little glistening sparkles in the air, just drifting and floating down to the ground. And other areas just looking more like a haze or a bit dusty. And she becomes aware of how much the sun is setting by the way the birds start to go quiet, and she starts to hear different sounds in the forest. Starts to hear the nighttime creatures waking up, and she carries on pushing through that forest. And after quite a while, she's aware that the only light that she can see is the light from her torch. If she looks up, she can notice that some moonlight is managing to almost give a silvery glow to the tips of the canopy, but it's barely managing to push through to the forest floor. And as night time sets in, so she begins to have that sense of calmness and relaxation, almost like the world around her has become calmer and more relaxed, almost like the world has gone to sleep. And she can still hear some of those nighttime animals, but they sound so much more relaxed and calm than the daytime animals. And with the sounds around her being reduced, she begins to hear the distant sound of a stream that she couldn't hear earlier on in the evening. And as she continues to walk, she's aware of that sound getting louder and louder, hearing that bubbling, trickling sound of the water. And that gets louder and louder as she continues pushing through the forest. And then she has this feeling that she can smell the water. And she just thinks of it almost as a sense that she's aware she's closing in on that stream. And after quite a while of walking, she eventually reaches that stream. And she walks along the edge of the stream, following that stream the rest of the way through the forest, where she can make better time, knowing that now she doesn't have to push and force her way through the branches. And she follows that stream all the way out of the forest and finds herself in a meadow, looking down over a clearing, down over a bit of a valley, and this stream flows out the forest, down through the meadow, and seems to carve its way down and round through this valley. But the forest doesn't seem to follow, and she walks out into that meadow, and she heads down the hill. She can feel the now cool breeze on her face. And as she walks away from the forest, so the sounds of the animals in the forest begin to get dimmer and dimmer, further and further away. And she can hear some sounds around her, sounds of the occasional bit of scurrying in the meadow. And she heads all the way down, following that stream. And she can smell the flowers in this meadow. And the stream isn't particularly deep. And as she nears the lowest point, that stream kind of jumps down some shallow waterfalls, creating a little spray that creates almost like a silvery rainbow with just subtle rainbow colours in the spray. And she walks through the stream barefoot, walks out the other side, feeling the coolness of that water, the tickling of the water against her ankles. She carries on up into the meadow the other side of the stream, heads slightly uphill the other side of the stream, until she's at a point where when she looks back the direction she came, she can see a full moon beaming down in her direction. And she decides that here is where to set up the telescope. So she sets up that telescope, sets up her equipment, and just appreciates the silence here and the stillness. And she looks over towards the moon. And while looking towards the moon, she sees the silent shadow of an owl pass in front of that moon. That's obviously gliding and circling overhead. And she sets up that telescope, looks through the eyepiece at the moon, gets it into focus. And her first thing she wants to take a photo of through the telescope will be the space station crossing the moon. And so she lines up that shot, attaches her camera to the telescope, programs the telescope to track the moon. She's wearing a digital watch, and she looks at that watch, presses the button, makes the small light illuminate the face of the watch. She sees that she's got just 2 minutes until the fraction of a second that the space station will be crossing the moon. So she waits until the 1 minute mark and then starts the camera filming high speed. She counts down on her watch. And the watch beeps with an alarm at the moment that the space station should have crossed the moon. And she couldn't see it looking up at the moon. And she didn't want to touch her equipment while it was filming. So she left it filming just for another minute while she turned off the alarm on her watch. Then she stopped her camera and she sat down on her jacket beside the telescope. She held her camera in her hands. She looked through the eyepiece of the camera to review that video footage. And she pressed play and watched that video footage in slow motion. I could see this tiny, almost like a ship with two wings, almost like an X, going past the moon. And while looking through the eyepiece, she felt that sense of wonder where she couldn't see anything else other than the moon and that ship crossing the moon, watching that space station pass across the moon. And she had this feeling almost like she was out in space with it, as that was the only thing she was aware of in that moment, just so deeply focused on what was going on through the eyepiece. And she watched that again and again, a handful of times. She'd managed to get that shot. And she keeps pausing it to see which frame will make the best photo. And then as the night carries on and passes midnight, she lies back on her jacket on the grass. She can feel the slight dampness to the grass in the evening air. And she gazes up at the stars. And she can see some clouds passing across the sky, passing across the moon, and really high clouds passing across the moon, creating almost like a ghostly ring of light around the moon. And as her eyes adjust to the night, so she can see more and more stars twinkling in the sky. She can see dots travelling across the sky as satellites pass overhead. Then she sees the comet beginning to rise up above the horizon. And she thinks that it looks unusual because it's rising above the horizon tail first. And so from her perspective, it almost looks like it's flying backwards. But she's aware that's just because of the spin of the earth. And that the tail doesn't have a bearing on which direction it's heading. And she finds it fascinating, the idea that on Earth, a tail of material would follow behind the object, whereas in space, the two tails are in relationship to the sun. And so sometimes a comet will be heading towards the sun and the tail will be behind it. Other times, the comet will be heading away from the sun, and so the tail will be in front of it. Then she sets up the telescope on the comet, programs it in to track that comet, and then begins to record that comet with her camera through the telescope, and just leaves that camera set up, recording through the telescope throughout the rest of the night, so that she can do a time lapse showing it moving across the sky, and showing the movement and some detail within the comet. And while that camera records, she sets up a small tent, just somewhere she can lie down and relax in for a bit, as it's now moving into the early hours of the morning. And she can hear the sound of the edges of the tent flapping slightly in the wind. She can smell that crisp country air of being in a tent, and feel that relaxing sensation of lying back on a sleeping bag and just resting there. And she doesn't do anything specific. She doesn't put any lights on. She doesn't want to impact on the footage she's trying to capture. She just rests there, being absorbed in the moment. And she can see out of the tent the night sky, the moon passing across the sky, stars. And she begins to feel a sense of deep peace and calm, almost like being out in nature is helping to calm her down, helping to slow down her mind and body, helping her heart rate to gently slow, her breathing to gently slow, helping the muscles through her head, her face, her shoulders, down her body, through her legs and arms, to soften and relax. And as she relaxes, so she occasionally feels her eyes flicker and want to shut. And she plans on filming and just letting that film run for many hours, until just before sunrise. So she allows her eyes to gently close. As her eyes close, she lies back on that sleeping bag and begins to drift and float comfortably asleep. And while she drifts and floats comfortably asleep, she dreams about being in a monastery high up in a mountain range, well above most of the clouds, where you've got the most incredible view of the sky, where the air is really cold and crisp, where the stars are still. She has this sense of sitting gazing up at the sky, feeling so deeply relaxed, and gazing at what looks like an egg-shaped star, and softening her gaze, letting the muscles around her eyes relax. And allowing herself to travel in her mind's eye towards that egg-shaped star. And as she gets nearer to it, she starts to notice that it's Saturn, noticing its rings, noticing some of its moons. And she discovers herself almost like a mind in space, travelling and floating a comfortable distance from Saturn, the perfect vantage point to get the best view, to be able to see the majesty of its rings, to be able to see the way those rings move around the planet, to see the clouds moving on Saturn, the moons circling the planet, and the silence of being in space, and the peace. And then she has a sense of drifting from Saturn and exploring Jupiter, and seeing the colours, the complex patterns of the clouds, the storms, and the moons around Jupiter. And she ends up in awe at the scale of the planet as she sees it from the best vantage point. And after a while of her mind wandering, exploring the planets, almost like she's a mind in space, she finds her mind drifting back to being high up in that mountain, to being aware of the whistling sound of the wind, the freshness of the cold air on the cheeks. She opens her eyes on this mountain top, gazes down at the clouds below that are just gently illuminated by the slither of moonlight in the sky, and the way those clouds almost rolling and undulating, looking almost liquid-like as they bash against the side of the mountain and seem to try and flow around the mountain. And some of the cloud bashes back the way it came, like water rolling in against a shore. And she sees what she would describe as a totem next to her. And she feels this deep connection with that. She starts gazing at it, allowing that to fill her attention and allowing the animals on it to draw her in, where she starts to feel this connection with the life on the planet, while she wonders whether there's life anywhere else, wonders whether there's life on other moons, other planets, what that life may be, whether there's any complex life or whether it's all just cells in space. And she starts to have this sense of how incredible the Earth is if it's the only oasis of life out there. And that currently it is the only one we know. And she starts to think about the diversity of that life, the difference between a tiger and a giraffe, the difference between a hawk and an owl, how they have certain similarities, and yet it's their differences that help them to thrive and survive and carve out their own path. And as she continues to drift deeper and deeper asleep, so this experience begins to fade away, and her mind fades to a comfortable nothingness, to a place where there's no time, no past, no present, no future, no space, no back, no forward, no left, no right, no up, no down. No reference points, just a comfortable nothingness. No sensations. And she finds that that nothingness, that mind of nothingness, helps her drift even deeper asleep, where the mind shuts off. And before you have time to realize that the mind has shut off, you fall asleep. And then she hears this distant beeping. And gradually can begin to hear the sound of being in the tent. And then begin to feel the sound and begin to feel the feeling of the sleeping bag. And then she begins to come to in that tent. She stops the alarm on her watch. She leaves the tent and checks on her equipment. And the camera and telescope have now taken the footage that she wanted. She takes the camera again, puts it in the tent. She packs away the telescope. She can notice the slightest light in the distance of the sun approaching, rising. She sits back in that tent. She watches the footage she's just recorded before deciding to get a couple more hours of sleep. And then she'll spend some of the day here in this valley before heading home. And feeling a sense of being pleased with herself, she drifts and floats asleep. Awakening a few hours later, feeling so refreshed and alert and revitalized, so full of energy. She heads out of her tent. She has something to eat, packs her tent away, and carries her backpack and her telescope as she follows that stream further through the valley. Never explored this valley before. She came here for this photo opportunity. But having come so far, she decides to explore this valley a little first before heading home. She follows that stream, notices how the stream seems to be getting a little deeper the further into the valley she goes, and seems to also be getting a little faster and a little narrower. And then she sees a building in the distance, and so she walks to that building. She can see that half the roof is missing, half of one of its stone walls is missing. But it's got a wheel in the water, and many of the rungs are still there, and it still seems to be working as that water flows past and then seems to go down lower the other side. And she heads to that old building. She's curious about what it was, who owned it, where it was, why it was here just alone. And she walked in through the door frame, and she could see a chest in the corner, and the wood had rotted a little. She opened up that chest, looked inside, and she found inside that chest a single brooch. And she continued exploring. She found some drawers, and again a lot of the wood had rotted. And in the drawers were some scraps of paper. Nothing that would give anything away about who lived here. But she could see from the layout that she was walking through that it was just a small home, just a small place that looked like the water perhaps turned something that powered something. There seemed to be a kitchen area and a living area. There was a bed that was lying partly on the floor, where one of the legs and part of the middle had rotted away. She could see the fireplace, where part of the chimney had fallen down. She could see where the window was into this room. And she started having this sense of what it would be like to have been living here. And as she walked outside the building to explore around the other side of it, she could see that somebody had carefully placed some stones on top of each other. In the middle of a waterfall, and that the water was flowing around those stones, but somehow those stones were still standing, looking so precariously balanced. And she didn't know if this was done recently or a long time ago, but she was curious if it was done a long time ago, how it could still be standing. And she looked down the stream to see where it went, and she could see the way that that stream seemed to snake and weave its way through this valley. And she could see on the hills in the distance where the forest started up again. The forest carried on up onto the top of this valley and carried on for miles and miles. And there was just this small little valley, small little area of meadows in the middle of this large forest. And she enjoyed that sense of peace, walking around, just hearing the sound of the stream, sounds of birds, feeling the breeze on her face, but no other sounds around her, no sounds of people, no sounds of cars, no planes had been going overhead, just a sense of peace. And so she decided that she would stay here just a little longer. She knew it wouldn't take too long to get back up to the forest, that by the end of the night she'll be able to get back up through the forest and head home, and that she'll be home late, but it'll be a day well spent. So she decides to make the most of this peace, sets up her tent again, and just sits in that tent and just watches the world around her. She occasionally finds herself drifting off and dozing, having had a late night and very little sleep. And after each 20-minute or so doze, she finds herself feeling refreshed for a while. And then as the sun begins to set a little, she notices the most incredible thing, that the flowers here around the edge of the stream near this building seem to sparkle, almost like they've got glitter on them. And they seem to glow gently. And she watches as those gently glowing flowers sway in the breeze. And she sees as what looks like some pollen almost like glow in the dark pollen, a kind of fluorescent green, is floating off from those plants as they gently sway there. And so she gets a few photos before packing everything away again, following that stream all the way back up to the forest while the sun's setting, and then walking through the forest as that sun continues to set. And after a long walk, she comes out the forest where she started, and she can see the moon up in the sky. She can see the stars. It's beginning to get pretty late, and she makes the journey home. And as she drives home, so she feels a sense of peace, calmness, with that regular sound of the wheels on the road, no other cars around, the feeling of the breeze blowing in through the windows, the way the moonlight reflects on the metal of the car, and the warmth in the car. Then after many hours of driving, she can see the lights of the town that she lives in. She heads into the town, heads home. And she goes up to bed, is grateful for everything that she's been through, everything she's seen, grateful for the weather holding out, and excited to share her experience with others. She settles down in bed, and comfortably and relaxed, thinking about space, looking forward to reviewing the footage on larger screens, looking forward to editing the footage, and going through that footage in more detail the next day. She drifts and floats comfortably asleep, drifting into the most pleasant dreams, knowing she'll awaken feeling so full of energy and excitement for the day ahead, awakening in the morning feeling so full of energy and excitement for the day ahead, as she falls asleep comfortably and deeply.